Hi, welcome to our 13.5 Retro. I'm Lindsay, and I'll be your host. We're going to follow a similar format that we've used since 13.2. So there's a set of summary slides and a video available that you can watch in your own time that'll go over what went well, what didn't go well, what we want to improve on. Today, we're going to focus on the discussion topics that came out of the Retro document. Before we do that, we'll take about 5 minutes to look at the previous retrospective improvement tasks. I'll ask folks who had items that we're tracking to verbalize those. And then after the discussion topics, we'll also take 5 minutes to touch on the items that we've selected to focus on improving for next week. So jumping right in, the top of the previous retrospective improvement tasks. Ricky, are you on the call?
He is not on the call. I'm stepping in for him if you have any questions, though.
Cool. Do you want to go ahead and verbalize?
Verbalize. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we will start using labels to track where issues being added mid-iteration are coming from. So the labels being used as the follow-up label. Based on manual analysis, it looks like a combination between follow-up issues from MRs and issues that had unknowns when we were researching it initially, leading to issues requiring splitting mid-milestone. So this is still underway. We're still only a milestone in at most. So we'll need at least one more milestone to quantify if that's effective for us.
Thanks, Scott. Nick from Geo, are you on the call? I'll go ahead and verbalize. Nick was asking team members to shadow more experienced engineers during support calls and spread out the responsibility for those escalations. Since the level of customer support required from Geo development engineers can vary greatly from release to release, this will be an effort to track over multiple releases. So Nick did provide us an update on 13.5, telling us that there are 2 opportunities to shadow support calls, and a newer team member joined one of them. This is something they're going to continue to look at over the next few releases. It's a great idea. Christopher.
Yeah, we had action items from last time to basically work on improving how we use feature flags and how we roll features from production, or roll features into production, probably is a better way to say it, along with stable counterparts, graphs to look at, and then additional things. I delegated this to Wayne, and Wayne, can you give the rest of the update?
Sure. So a number of folks worked on this, including Marin and Ricky and I. So Marin took the lead on updating the handbook to clarify how the feature flag process interacts with the change management process. And I put in the MRs there, so that should help to link those properly. And also, we are working on a training issue template to monitor on what to monitor and how when changing feature flags. Any change can cause an outage. Feature flags are just one type of change, of course. Ricky put together a training issue template that with the links to all the pertinent training, potentially pertinent training. And we want to dog food this with a couple folks first before we unleash it on the entire team, because we want to make sure we're incorporating feedback on it. It's a bit long in terms of the number of videos and the length of them and number of handbook pages to read. So we want to get some feedback on it. And so we're looking for volunteers for that.
Thanks, Wayne. Our next item comes from Elliot from the Verify Runner group. It doesn't look like Elliot's on the call today. Unless if anyone else is involved in this discussion and wants to verbalize this, I'll go ahead and do it. Okay, so the Verify Runner group has been focusing on actions that'll impact mean time to merge over throughput with the hypotheses that'll improve both metrics. So Elliot gave an update in 13.5 about their focus on taking actions and reiterating that the MR author needs to do as much of the work as possible. If the reviewer or the maintainer feels like they're doing some of the work that could have been made easier by the author, usually around testing the feature out, they are not taking on the burden and are pushing it back to the author right away. I'll let you guys read the rest of the feedback from Elliot, but I think this first couple of sentences gives the general idea. And the next item is for me. I want to start by saying, so this was around our retrospective summary and around updating the summary to include the praise section. So I made the misinterpretation of this and I added it to the template for the issues that are created for each team, but it has yet to be added to the summary. So I'll make sure that as the follow-up, I work with whoever is doing the 13.6 retrospective to make sure that the praise section is added to this document as well and is included in the summary slides that are shared in the video. So as an update on the praise and the idea of using praise, like I said, this was added to the template for the teams that use the default template. I know a few teams have their own custom template, and I encourage them to add the praise section, and this is something that they find valuable. The secure and the memory managers have shared that they've had great success in 13.5 with getting praise from various parts of the team and sharing that during their synchronous discussion. And our final follow-up item comes from Jerome and John. Jerome or John, do either of you want to verbalize this item?
Yeah, sure,
6?
I can do it.
Thanks.
We manually added praise to our plan retrospective, by the way, as well, and got some team praise back. So thanks for that. So to set the context for this, in case you've forgotten, from last retrospective, we talked about shared areas of the code base that don't have distinct ownership by a group and how it can be difficult to work with those areas. Jerome and I looked at possibly using Git history to automatically update the code owners file, which would then automatically suggest through the GitLab UI appropriate code, appropriate domain experts for a given part of the code base. But we opened an issue for that and got some feedback that maybe wasn't the way to do it. But we also got some feedback that there were other things already in progress for this. So I've highlighted those there. They're basically two things. For areas of the code that do have ownership, but it's obscure, there's some work going on led by Rachel and Sean on the scalability team to kind of add feature categories to controllers. And then for areas that are truly shared, Chun has opened an MR to document those areas, and it's specifically around shared services like Redis and so on. But additionally to that, I mentioned in the last retrospective, GraphQL is an example of this, which wouldn't really fit with John's plan. And so I've added an item to the document on that as well, because we have an issue to discuss that. In the issue, there was an interesting discussion about the architecture workflow that may be appropriate for GraphQL. We're going to pursue that, and it may be appropriate for other parts of the code base that are shared in the same way GraphQL is.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. I look forward to sharing that with my team who's also using GraphQL. So that was the end of our what we were tracking to improve into 13.5. So we're going to move on now to our discussion topics. We have 2 topics, and we're going to try and keep this at around 7 minutes per topic. We're going to start out with a topic that Craig Gomes brought to the table. So Craig, I'll let you go ahead and verbalize it.
Sure. Thanks, Lindsay. So this topic spawned from the memory team talking about how we can make our own team retrospectives better. And we threw out a bunch of ideas and brainstormed, and it made me question the value of this one. And I was interested in hearing from other folks, attendees, both internally and externally, what people find valuable in this and why. And if they don't, and it may be harder to speak up on that one, why don't they find this valuable, and maybe some suggestions on how we can make it better. And I know we've been iterating on it a bit since 13.2 with this new format. And to be fair, when I first wrote this and I reread it, it sounded like I was negative on this retrospective process. It's not true. I found some value. I like hearing about what other teams are doing, their processes, improvements that they've made. To be honest, also, sometimes it feels like a checkbox that I need to scramble and do because I forgot about it at the end of the month. So I'd love to hear feedback on what other people think of this process and what value or what improvements we could make.
As an attendee and not the facilitator today, I've found this call to be much more valuable to me since we started focusing on these types of discussions. I felt like there was a lot of just reading the items before. So that's a big improvement. that we're trying to bring to our team as well. So we're trying to emulate that in our team-wide or our group-wide discussion.
Yeah, I probably misinterpreted your question a little bit, Craig, but like one thing I kind of more generally answer, which is, I found retrospectives over the years. I've definitely been in teams where retrospectives haven't been valuable. And it's usually in direct correlation to how much effort's put in. Obviously you don't want to put too much effort in. You want to do just enough so that it feels like it's useful, but at the same time, it's obviously not where the only focus is when we're doing efforts. This one is clearly a fair amount of work from that perspective. I do like the cross-section collaboration. I think that's something that is super key, particularly if we find hotspots of like things that teams can basically collaborate better on and solve together. I do think you have to change it up periodically as well. That's I don't think we're there yet on this current iteration, but it's almost like sometimes you almost need to switch it back to a previous iteration just to change things up so people kind of pay attention from this. But you don't want to do it so much that people don't know how to react from that perspective. So, and then the other thing honestly is the one thing I have seen is where retrospectives have gone south is people aren't heard, and I don't want to speak for that because I don't think I can. But if people feel like they're not being heard, I would love to hear that. Like I feel like things aren't getting fixed. Then that's something that we might want to think about either through a qualitative survey or something. Because if one in particular, if engineers feel like they're not getting things fixed or addressed, then that's something we need to get proactive about. And the retrospective is usually how you oftentimes address that.
And I just wanted to add that I think it's pretty valuable when you're trying to identify maybe trends across the organization or lessons learned. So if I read through here and I see there's another team having the same problems and struggles that I'm having, I can look at the options that they use to remedy their issues. Or I can be proactive and see that this other team is struggling with this, and I can make sure I don't have that same struggle. So I can learn from others' mistakes. And I also like how it's async, so that I can go back and look at things historically that might have happened, or if I'm a new EM, just joining the stage, I can kind of see what's been discussed in the past, but I really like it. So that's my perspective.
If I could jump in, I've worked in agile organizations for many years, seen retrospective and a lot as well. I think they're really important. They go back to the original extreme programming agile practice of retrospectives. One of the important things is there's regular cycles that's and iterations, and the retrospective is also this regular cycle to people to step back, reflect on what's gone good and gone bad, and make an intentional space to be able to share that in a completely candid way. So at least on individual teams, I think it's really important. This is the first time I've seen like a company-wide roll-up like this, especially in Dell, so it's interesting, but at the individual team level, they're really important.
I don't know the historical reason about when the ritual happens. I wonder whether we could alternate the ritual between the Europe friendly time and also the APAC friendly time. I felt our APAC people actually were not involved very much. I think maybe that's something we can consider if we are flexible about the time.
That's a great idea, CZ. Let's add it as an action item for next retro. Next retro is December, so it's kind of a less sparsely populated. But let me think about whether we do it in December or January. That's kind of what I'm debating in my head right now. But I like the idea.
I think I'll add on to what Chad said about. I think retrospectives are most useful when you can take a step back, take a breather, and really have the time to reflect. I feel like the last few milestones have been a bit of a blur just due to the constant pace of change. And, because it looks a little bit like a blur, then 4 weeks goes by really quickly, and then you've got another retro to fill out. So I think having that sort of more set cadence or pace would be helpful, so that we can accurately reflect and implement changes.
And I do need to share that we only have about 2 minutes left on this topic so that we can stay on our agenda. I know there's a number of items that still haven't been verbalized.
Yeah, I can take mine. Yeah, so I don't want to, I don't remember exactly the feedback from last time, but I don't want to sort of paraphrase somebody, but it was something along the lines of what people mentioned there about the retrospectives blurring into each other. Maybe team members feel like they're being sort of, they have a kind of retro fatigue, or like they're overpolled for their opinion. And I know, having facilitated the retro last month, that the timeline is very long, and it feels like the time that we don't have an open retro issue for each team is shorter than the time that we actually have an open retro issue at some point. And in a normal, like, agile environment, the retrospective is an event. So, everybody gets together at one time and shares their, and I think what we want to do is be as inclusive as possible, but perhaps we could compress the timeline a bit. I think, Lindsay, I'd be interested in your feedback as well, but I think it'd be easier on the moderator as well, because you don't end up with this kind of period at the end of the retrospective where you kind of have to collate all the data, but also come out with the topics as well. So maybe just my point is just maybe that the fact that the retros run into each other so much maybe leaves people sort of with very little to say.
I agree with that. And before we move on, I want to add again, as an attendee and not the moderator today, that we should remember who our audience is for this larger roll-up. I think that individual team members put a lot more stock into the conversation that they have with their direct team, while managers and other stakeholders might, find this conversation to have a different type of value. I'm not going to say more valuable. And on that note, I would like to move on to the next topic. If there's other discussion, we can continue it asynchronously, either here in the document or the Slack channel. I think there's a lot of different forums to keep talking about this. Thank you for bringing it up, Craig. Thomas, this was an item that I think you had originally had on the 13.4 retrospective, but it wasn't selected as a discussion topic, and I thought that it had a lot of value, sort of selfishly for my own purposes, but would you mind verbalizing what you shared here?
Sure thing. All right. So I'm going to read as what was written as is, and then I'll add a little bit more information at the end of it. And so basically, how can we ensure differences in process don't make it more difficult to collaborate across teams? What we have in the secure subdepartment, one front-end team which works against 4 back-end teams. And while each team follows the product development flow that we've articulated within the handbook, each team's interpretation of it is unique enough to make it really hard for team members who have assignments spanning multiple teams in one iteration. To restate it just a little bit slightly, I mean, it's not that each team's workflow is completely disparate and is completely unique from each other's. It's the interpretation of how we are delivering software is just different enough that it makes it really hard for those that have to work against multiple groups at the same time. Whether it's what labels are being used on issues, or where the implementation plan is going, and the timing that those activities for refinement are occurring, can make it hard. And we're struggling here. And this is something that we're going to continue to be working on, just based off upon that dynamic. And I will pause there because I see that this has sparked a lot of conversation already.
I'll share my first feedback is that I don't have an answer, but I just want to call out that as a front-end manager, there's definitely that challenge of having multiple groups that you support. But additionally, I imagine for stable counterparts who are either across multiple stages or multiple groups, that's just exponentially harder. Clement, are you on the call?
I was going to say, I don't think he's on the call. I'll verbalize.
Okay, thanks, Darva.
Clement says, ideally the PMs, EMs, backend plus front end can come together to build a similar workflow to ensure that everyone is fully productive. I just wanted to echo that. We had on knowledge and editor, we had 2 different PMs, but for back end and front end, we had the same PMs, and it was really difficult. And so we just set up a meeting, and all of us got together and agreed on one common product workflow. They had a few differences, but for the most part, it worked really well. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm honestly wondering, I mean, what we were struggling with is the same class. I'm wondering how well it scales once you get past 2 or 3. Once we get into 4 or 5 groups that are having to work together and having to actually synchronize on the clock, that's where I'm struggling. And whether we need to go more in lockstep or if we need to go more decoupled. And I'll be honest, that's where my instincts are going.
I would game through each scenario and see if there's inefficiencies down a certain path. But if everyone can get on the same page, whether it's 3, 4, 5, 6, it's probably best, because it's really difficult to remember how to switch up. Like, this team uses labels, this team doesn't. This team waits, this team doesn't. This one's Kanban. It's really hard if you have one engineering team that has to like meet all the demands of all the different requirements. So I would impress upon them the improvement in efficiency of just agreeing to like at least 70 to 80% of the same things. I know we referred them to the handbook, but they all interpreted the handbook differently.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in the cases Jerome has in here something. I don't know if Jerome wanted to verbalize his.
Sure. So we also heard the same feedback from UX, which had to span multiple growth groups. And some groups were using Kanban and other ones were using a different method. Our approach was to, allow flexibility for each team to be able to have their own process, but have constant syncs between each of the teams, and then start bubbling up and standardizing the process. So we started with estimation, having a different scale across all of those different teams. And then eventually, as growth, we started to standardize that, which makes it easier for the teams that have to work across many different groups.
Did we document either of those agreements in the handbook, either for knowledge or growth?
We had ours. Sorry, go ahead.
Same as you, we documented ours in our handbook. As soon as we had the meeting and agreed, we documented it.
Okay. Can you send me pointers to those offline? I wonder if what we need to do is like a toolbox assessment here to say basically, if you find yourself in this situation, here's kind of what we think is like a recommended way to kind of work yourself out of it. And like high level, Thomas, my advice would be is think in terms of not trying to do it all at once, but maybe, like not trying to get everybody lockstep on process, but like whatever the actual pain points that are the most problematic from an inconsistency, though I know that sounds probably like, well, what I'm saying, which is have my cake and eat it too. That may not make sense depending on the situation. So you and I may have to talk about that a little bit more offline.
And on that note, I think any other discussion around this is going to have to move offline, and we have a couple minutes left. Thank you, Christy, for the reminder. So I want to make sure we take a couple of minutes to cover the items that we're tracking to improve for the next release. Thank you, everyone, for that great discussion, and Thomas and Craig for bringing the topics to the table. Just to quickly go down the list, I know Ricky's not on the call, so I'm going to go ahead and verbalize the first item that we're tracking, which is around the verified team has run into issues of not having documentation expectations clearly marked. So they're working to be more attentive to make sure that that section of the issue template is taken care of as they're working through the milestone. Cheng Zhen, would you like to verbalize number 2?
Yes. Since we have made a lot of performance improvements, the team gradually shift more work on the UX and UI improvements. But the team felt that it's still quite important that we keep an eye on the performance issues.
Thank you. And I think Chad is verbalizing number 3. Thank you, Darva, for updating that.
Sure. I think this is along the theme of how do we balance autonomy versus collaboration of different teams as we scale, and it also makes me think of like Conway's law that systems mirror the organizational structures. But this is specifically about 2 team retros ago. I mentioned this MR that is here about the pros and cons of slicing MRs horizontally versus vertically. And there was a lot of interesting discussion that went into there, a lot of strong opinions held. And one of the engineers on our team took that, and we had been working horizontally. And he, Vasily, tried to do an MR vertically, and he came to the conclusion of a lot of people that original MR that made it a lot more difficult. There's a lot more coordination that has to be involved. Just logistically, there's many more things to do, more builds to possibly break, and various things like that. So the conclusion we came to, again, like many people in the original MR, was that splitting things, MRs horizontally, is much more efficient and has more benefits than drawbacks, at least in the way GitLab approaches the way of working.
Thanks, Chad. I know this is a topic that's been discussed quite a bit lately, so I would love to, I'm looking forward to hearing the follow-up of how this is working out for the static site editor team. The last 2 items to follow up. The first one is for me around making sure that the praise section actually gets added to the summary part. Apologies if that wasn't present in 13.5. And I'll just read the last one for Christopher. He's going to consider changing the retrospective to alternate the APAC to accommodate for our friends, our teammates in the APAC time region. And on that note, we're wrapping up our retrospective. I look forward to hearing about how things go in 13.6. And I appreciate all of your time.
Great job
Thank
on
you.
putting this together.